talks about Jesus as the great reminder. It's an interesting image, isn't it? Jesus as the great reminder. What does he remind us of? Remind us of our essential goodness. Remind us that God loves us. Remind us that we got responsibilities for the world. And finally, all of this sets up courage for the future. If the new thing's being created, then we need to work with God along that line. Number 9. This is another notion of God. I think it's a great one. It's God as gracious host. God's made the world. It's our home. And he's like, it's a God of hospitality. He's created a nice place for us. And a warm and friendly place in many ways. And he's taken his time to create it over these 20 billion years to make it like this. And to bring life out of it. And given us this marvelous earth to live on. And we could think of the United States, this marvelously rich country that we have. And God has made it all. He's hospitable. Welcomes us into it. And therefore, then, that makes a difference. There's a typo here, which is not our secretary's fault, since she now reads my writing better than I do, but my own mistake. But that really should read, we have to change it in number 9 and give a very misleading picture. That is, therefore, we should move towards holiness not by trying to be perfect. That's a major theme in Eckhart. I mean, well, in Fox, echoes in Eckhart, I guess. Not by trying to be perfect. In other words, he doesn't want us to get into this thing, I got to get everything together and get sort of tense about it, and I got to overcome every fault and be perfect, and so on. There's an interesting interplay here between Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel. In Matthew's gospel, the phrase is, as we well remember it, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And that's been the one that's been picked up. We Christians have got to be perfect as we're called to perfection. The parallel passage in Luke says, be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. And that gives a very different sense. As you'll see later on, compassion becomes the key phrase for Fox and borrowing from Eckhart. So it should read, not move towards holiness, not by trying to be perfect, but by being grateful and reverent guests in the home. That would mean taking care of the environment, making sure the air we breathe is clean and the water's clean. And then by welcoming others. We're like God. How are we like God? By being good hosts and hostesses. Welcome. Then at the end of this whole section, in each of the 4 sections, what Fox does is pull together his ideas about sin and Christ and salvation. So one of the charges against him is that he has no sense of salvation and no sense of sin. I don't think that's true. What it is he's got a different list of sins. He's got different types of sins that he wants us to be careful of. And in this case, the sins are to cause ecological damage. Maybe for him, the sin is to tear up a styrofoam cup. That's what sin is. Or sin is to really create this dichotomy between men and women. Sin would be for men to look down on women or treat them as inferior. Or for women to allow themselves to be treated that way. That's where sin would be. Sin would come in despising the pleasures that God has given us. Sin would be to have a debased notion of sexuality. To think that sexuality is something bad or evil. Consumerism. Buying too much, thinking we have to have things. Those are the new sins. Another interesting sin is to fail to trust oneself or to love oneself. So we get sort of a new examination of conscience in Fox's work. And as you'll see, at the end of each of the 4 sections, you get a new listing of sins. You could put them all together and have a neat examination of conscience that would look very different than the standard ones. But all of that is okay because we have healing available. There is salvation which has been brought. Christ is God's wisdom. Christ brings us salvation. And what will this do then? It will awaken us to beauty. It will give us a sense of eros. Eros is the god of love in Greek thought, and in Roman thought it's Cupid. Eros is a powerful word in Greek thought, and Fox wants to resurrect it. The way we use the word today, it's negative. At least very often people will talk about erotic. It's almost equal with pornographic, erotic. But Fox wants us to use the word eros, erotic, in a positive sense. So he wants an erotic spirituality. And eros means that we have passion, that we care, that we get involved, that there's excitement and zest about life. To be erotic is something good because that's the way God made us. It's the opposite of the blase or indifference or not caring. So an erotic spirituality is part of what we need. And then we need Christ's saving help in order to be able to overcome the dualisms that threaten us and to try to empower others. Well, I think what I'm going to do is darkness. This is his theology of the cross, as he likes to say. And his theological point is that fundamentally God's Spirit is at work in the dark as well as the light. Nothing is foreign to the Creator. And therefore, we have to somehow embrace the dark forces of life, the deaths that assail us. Now, that is, many people are in touch with this. That means, like in Jungian thought, accepting our shadow side. Oh, that means like people are saying, well, this terrible thought I'm thinking here, I just can't deal with it, and I have to put it out, and I can't face the fact that I'm jealous. I just pretend like I'm not jealous all the time. That's a dark force that one I don't want to face. Or someone says, well, a sin. Well, I don't want to even think about it. I don't want to think about it, and I'm not going to think about it. And so I just go along and sort of settle for the mediocrity. There's trouble in the marriage, we're not going to face it. We're not going to talk about it. Because it's too painful. It's a dark force that will get in our way and mess things up and so on. So, what he wants us to do is to embrace the dark forces, just like all the psychologists want us to do in much of modern theology. That's part of us. Dark forces, any of those things that seem to be so scary and so on, the death. So how are we going to do that? Well, one of the things he wants us to do is to be quiet with it. He likes the breathing meditation, the mantra meditation. That's a good way to get in touch with those dark forces. Be quiet. Silence. In other words, that much of the busyness of life is precisely running away from the dark forces. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Workaholics, compulsive people, very often, why? Well, it's better than sitting there being gobbled up by the dark forces. You know, if you keep working, at least you don't have to think. It's why, for many people, the silence at Mass is so uncomfortable. If it's over 5 seconds, people start to stir and so on. So, what he wants us to do is embrace the dark forces by dealing with silence. Sort of a Quaker idea. We did that at our staff meeting the other day. We said we'll have a Quaker-type prayer. The Quaker-type prayer is you just sit there in silence, and then if anyone wants to talk, fine. If not, someone wrote me a letter recently, said they were at a Quaker meeting for 2 hours, and only four people talked in all that time. And it was just briefly, and then everyone else just sat there for 2 hours. Try that one. So my friends who meditate regularly say, great, I like it. Give me 2 hours. Other people who are constantly harassed in various ways would also like it. So he wants us to do that kind of thing. That's how we're going to get in touch with the dark forces. And we're not going to mortify ourselves. So mortification is a bad thing. Mortification comes from the Latin word mor, which is death. So we're not supposed to kill the dark forces. We're supposed to befriend them, bring them into the psyche. That's where Jung thinks we get our energy. You get your energy from bringing the dark forces. So this anger that one is so afraid to look at, when you start to bring it into the psyche, then you can find new energy. Instead of being tired from repressing anger all the time, and that is a great cause of fatigue, I believe, to embrace it, to bring it in, sort of frees us up and gives us some kind of new energy here. So let's not kill it by controlling, gritting our teeth, but let us move forward here through this other method of embracing the dark forces. Questions? I will go on then. Now, the next question has to do not that there's specifically with a specific type of dark force, and that is the pain. And what he wants us to do is fundamentally the same thing. Jesus Christ embraced suffering. Father, not my will, but thine be done. The agony in the garden. Father, in your hands I commend my spirit. That might be well used elsewhere, but Christ embraces human suffering. Touched the lepers, reaches out to those who are hurting, deals forthrightly with the misunderstanding of his disciples, doesn't get bent out of shape over it, still remains calm and embracing to them. Therefore, if Christ was like that, that's what we should do as well. And what does he want us to do? His catchphrase is, let pain be pain. Now, the only thing I can relate that to is my experience with being raw. All those in the room who've been raw know that that's one of the more painful things in life. I was raw 12 times for an hour and a half each time. The raw thing is when some guy takes his elbow and digs it in like that, runs it down your muscle structure as hard as he can. Well, there's a theory about being raw that if you don't fight it, it won't hurt so much. So Rolfer will tell you, if you resist, this will really hurt you. And if you don't, it'll just hurt a lot. Anyway, that's what I have to relate to. Let pain be pain might be something like that. Well, I'm not sure exactly what that means. Let pain be pain. Embrace it in order to let go of it. That's Fox's idea. This will release its energy again. Well, you know, I hate to even make jokes about it, and that's probably just something about my own outlook on it, that I would joke about it. But that, I mean, in one sense, pain is not to be joked about. I mean, people's pain is painful. I mean, they don't like it. And some people can't get away from pain, and that even becomes worse. And so, I gotta be leery, it seems to me, to talk glibly about pain. But Fox here, and I think that he wants us to see it in some positive way. So how are you going to get positive about pain? Well, you can learn from it. That's one thing you could do. In other words, you could learn to empathize with others. If you think of your own pain, other people are in pain, then maybe you're more empathetic to them or compassionate towards them. Then it might also help us to learn the importance of simple things. Walking out of the work's office. In your car. I mean, and you appreciate that. In fact, some of the simple bondings of life. And it can help us be more disciplined. Collaborate with others to overcome pain, especially caused by unjust systems. So there we get, a positive approach to how we're supposed to deal with pain. I would say they got these pain control clinics, and people try to monitor their reaction to be able to control and do marvelous things like that. Maybe that's part of whatever this means, letting pain be pain. Let's open Now, we get to the deeper problems of life here. I see a lot of points that even if the mother should forget her child, still I will not forget. Who says the Lord our God? In other words, He's with us at everything and every part of our lives. Now, that raises this kind of problem of life, and that is Angst, the German word for anxiety, which is really the fear of knowingness. In other words, one can understand why it's got angst. It isn't because one's afraid of heights or speaking in front of groups or of being raw. It has nothing to do with that. It's fear that overtakes one and grabs hold of one, and you don't know what it is. You're upset and fearful, but you don't know why. It's the fear of the unknown, of not being in control. It's what people feel when they get up in airplanes that can't stand to fly. I mean, you tell them the odds are it isn't going to come down, and they sort of know that, at least crash, I mean. They sort of know that. They might even tell you that. You know, I don't really think it's going to crash, but they've got angst. So angst becomes the deepest kind of human problem, and I think it drives us to most of our compulsions and so on. And what Fox, again, has got the same general theory: don't run from angst. Face it, embrace it, take hold of it. I would say don't even treat into prayer in relationship to angst. Don't even say, God, take this away from me. But there's a way in which one has to just let it be and take one over and find out that it's not disintegrate. So we embrace our side of the soul, visit the desert, have to laugh at ourselves and so on. That is helpful in the process. And then this is going to really help us to be personal and help us to deal with others as well. Very important thing Knox is saying here, and I think a very deep thing, that we have to trust finally that even in that terrible, frightening, terrifying kind of thing that takes us over, that we call anxiety, that even God is to be found in that. And I'm convinced that it's angst that drives us to most of our compulsions, to drink and whatever other compulsions take people over. I believe that is the thing. Now, I think here of Paul Tillich's book, The Courage to Be, where Tillich would have a much richer and deeper analysis than Fox and would guide us into knowing what to do. Tillich says you have to have the courage to be. You have to have the courage to face into the anxiety, and then finally one will find that God is with one in that whole process. Okay, now we summarize the second pass here, just as we did in the other ones, and we find a new set of sins here. So now the sins that we need to deal with in this case are that we fail to let ourselves be forgiven. No, we fail to trust all the things that he was trying to say. We think that the dark forces are stronger than the forces of light. Afraid to go out, reach out. And then it says here, avoid the sin of clinging to control. That's a good phrase, clinging to control. To let go of that, I think. And projecting our fears and repressions onto people who are different. So very often those fears that can't be handled get projected. I mean, I think we see that a lot in the homophobia. People who are not secure sexually then have a great need to look down on gays. Because they threaten them. It's a threatening kind of thing. What was there, movies recently that portrayed that? Or can't think. Somehow images like that in my mind. But anyway, I think that is a psychological thing that happens, that when one has particular fears inside oneself, it's easy to project them onto others, and therefore you don't seem to have to deal with them. So projection, he thinks, is one of the sins. But Jesus Christ came to overcome fear. That's one of the ways I understand the miracles of Christ, which I think is so essential. When you hear those miracles, it's not just to say, wow, far out, what a wonderful thing he did there. I think the operative point very often has to be that, look, it's saying over and over that the dark forces, no matter how powerful, can be defeated. There's a force that's more powerful than all the demonic forces in the world, more powerful than angst and the need to control and all of the things that assail us. That's what the miracles say. Jesus cast out the devils. He casts out the powers of darkness. He's more powerful than they are. And so he comes to overcome our own fears, to give us the good news that we can face up to all of this. Here is befriending creativity. Here we get a lot of the notion that we are made in God's image. We have creative powers, and we're really co-creators. Now that becomes a phrase again that's used by many theologians, that this ongoing creation isn't just that God does it and we're passive observers of it, but we're involved in it, and that we are making the world. It's many of us who have read Teilhard, they start to enter into that we push the evolutionary spiral forward. Our little part of the world has to be created, and if we don't do it, it doesn't get done. So we're making the world. We're with God in the process. And the key phrase becomes we're co-creators. And then, if we're co-creators, then we got to do things about ourselves. As he said, discover the artist in ourselves. Got to discover what we're good at and release our creativity. And then he likes to talk about simple things, being a storyteller, or dancing, or doing carpentry, and so on. That a lot of this, he wants us all to think of ourselves as artists. Everyone in the room is an artist. And a lot of what he does for people, as I understand it, I've talked to people who have been in his institutes and so on, say that that's what he wants to do. Like sometimes they do artwork in the dark, so no one will see, and you're not comparing them, one or the other. So you're not afraid to create. Creates pottery in the dark or something. And so people, you won't have to say, well, it's good or bad. Just release the creativity, allow it to happen. Draw something, or write something, or compose a short story, or let your fantasy run wild and write some wild letter to somebody. Anyway, release the artist in ourselves and get in touch with that, and then we'll do a better job of helping God create this whole world of ours. All the rest of these in this section have to do, in one way or another, with creativity. His way of saying, let it flow. The next one really dovetails with all of that. He says, he wants us, again, there's a way he wants us to understand ourselves. We are God's work of art. He made us in the image of the potter, for example. Many people like God's the potter, we're the clay. God molds us. He is the artist. We're the product of his hands. Therefore, there's something good about this. And what we should be in touch with our own goodness and our own creativity. And here again, he's saying how we're going to do that. And his phrase that he uses over and over is art as meditation. Here's where you get sort of the notion against spiritual exercises of Ignatius. He says the problem with much of the spirituality is that there's these other images that people like Ignatius have developed, and then they want you to get into those. They want you to have those images. Or a preacher says, have this image, or your mother or somebody, have these images of God or religion. And he says that's always destructive. So what he wants us to do is to let the images emerge, allow them to come out of our own psyche. So instead of doing Ignatius' spiritual exercises where it says, well, now pretend you're the woman at the well, and you get sort of trapped in that role, don't do that, but let it happen. So garden, do gardening. Let your imagination go that way. Body massage. What's a different kind of education where we wouldn't truncate people's imaginative capabilities? I think he was talking about the fact that, if you do a test that most first and second graders are very creative, and most college students aren't. So he says, what happened? How could that be? And so he wants education that would make people more creative by the time they're in less. They have to get an educational system that develops creativity and doesn't just tell people to program them and stifle them and say there's only one way to draw a tree or something. Got to let it go. Art as meditation becomes his big thing, allowing lovemaking to be an art rather than a technique. Or subtitle, Moving Beyond, I forgot the name of that guy, which is Dr. Rubin, Moving Beyond Dr. Rubin's book. Whatever you wanted to know about sex and we're afraid to act. So make lovemaking be an art rather than a technique. Then, similar ideas here, I think, and that is that God has given us imagination, we ought to use it. But how are we going to use it? Well, he's got an idea from Eckhart that he pulls out, and he uses this repeatedly. Eckhart talked about directing our passions through a bridle of love. So what he wants us to do is really discipline ourselves instead of mortifying ourselves. Don't crush the passions and the drives, but use discipline, which he does say that's hard work. But you do the disciplines in order to free up your creativity. I can't ever talk about that without thinking of Flannery O'Connor, who said, isn't your religion constricting to your Catholicism, constricting to your fiction writing, great short story writer, Catholic? And Flannery O'Connor said, no, that frees me up. The structure frees me up. It's the same way with what Karl Rahner said, I fear my subjectivity. He needed the structure of the church in order to be able to function creatively. Thomas Merton the same way. Structure of the monastery ended up helping him. So Fox wants to get in a positive notion here of discipline, which will be the bridle of love, which will allow us to use our passions and, as he likes to say here, then following the horse imagery, ride our own images. A lot of the things that I like to do, I think, play in that same thing. Like I would like to get people, instead of a pre-formed image of God, take an important encounter in your life, think about it in detail, see where it is sort of beyond the rational, beyond calculation, what is mysterious in it, and then form images about that, and then those will be your images of God. And then relate those images to some you find in the Bible. So, in other words, it's an exercise to find out who's God really for me. Not who somebody told me God is, but in my guts and out of my own imagination, which God gave me, what emerges about how God really is. Ride our own images. And the next one is number 4, the doctrine of the Trinity, which leads him to sort of an idea that we should have a both-and approach to life instead of an either-or. Both-and. Instead of saying always, well, it's either men or women are right, or any of those dichotomies. We want to get both-and kind of consciousness. We think that'll help us to release our creativity. Then number 5, we get more of the mother image and the compassion. You see the encircling and closing kind of idea, and that he thinks again will help us to do better in caring for this earth of ours. And then number 6 does what all the summary statements at the end of the 3 or 4 sections do. That is, he talks about sins and how we're going to heal them and what Christ really does for us. So here the sins are, and the major one, he gives a lot of space to this, is sadomasochism. So he sees that as a misuse of imagination, destructive purposes such as pornography and so on. In other words, that deserves more talk here. He thinks that those dominating tendencies, those tendencies to dominate and control and even to hurt others, or to be dominated and to be hurt, those victim images, somehow are related to a lack of creativity. That it is a misuse of imagination. In other words, people have to ask themselves, let themselves be victims over long periods of time. A lot of that has come to our mind, as in recent past, with the women who, are publicized, who get beat up constantly, but keep going back to their husbands. to ask yourself, why is that? Why do they do that? And part of what Fox would say, why do people put up with behavior like that, is lack of imagination. They can't imagine another way of living. So the salvific thing, what Christ brings us, is to imagine not being a victim. Imagine what it would be like to live without being put down. Didn't I use that example somehow with patriarchy, or an article I wrote recently about expectations? Yes. The woman who was constantly being put down by people began to imagine herself as being a better person, imagine others treating her with respect, and lo and behold, people started to treat her with greater respect. Interesting sort of play-off. So, he thinks Jesus Christ brings us this. Christ is not a systematic theologian. He is a poetic storyteller who awakens images of the divine. I like that. That's how Jesus functioned, wasn't it? A storyteller. He didn't say, now, here's my outline. Point 1 is this. Point 2 is that. He told stories about the human condition and thereby helped free people up, bringing healing, salvation. So what is the salvation Christ brings? It's the ability to imagine possibilities, recover a sense of beauty, appreciation of that, trust our own images. I like that. I think that whole section there says it is important. I think the sadomasochism is a big problem in the culture, and I think that he's on to one way of overcoming it. That is the release of imagination. Most people think if you let your imagination go, then you're just going to imagine more ways to hurt people or dominate or get dominated. And maybe that is to short-circuit the process. To really be in touch with the imagination, I think, moves us forward. Questions? D, befriending the new creation. Now this has got much more to do with justice and the work of the Spirit. His theology here throughout has got a lot to do with the biblical Pauline notion that in Jesus Christ we are a new creation. Christ is a new creation. The world is different because Christ has come. We are changed. And if indeed this is true, that Christ has made a difference and his sending of the Spirit has changed the world, then we have to go about doing things differently. We have to try to create a better social order, establish peace and justice, and so on. Try to value individuals. We like to talk about it as a spiritual revolution. So, if indeed the world is different, changed, then we got to be part of the change and not part of the old order. The old order is where people dominate one another, or where people are outcast, or where people are made to feel inferior by people who use their intelligence to put them down. So that's the old order. The new order is, now we relate in a different way, on the basis of equality and mutuality. So our task, therefore, is to try to spread that new order, become part of the solution to those dualistic problems. Next number is talking about empowerment that comes from the Spirit. And we're supposed to now take up a prophetic vocation. We follow the Spirit. We are to be prophets. We're as much prophets as anybody else. So how are we going to do this? Well, he lists there 9 different ways that we're supposed to be prophets. We're supposed to listen to our own conscience that tells us this isn't right, that we have so much and others have so little. It isn't right to live in patriarchy. Listen to our own conscience. Then carrying on the creative energy of God. We're supposed to do that ourselves and try to get the working of the Spirit going in others. Maybe that might say, hey, let's get together and work on that. Saying no to injustice. His favorite theme, returning blessing for blessing. Being an artist. Well, a practical kind of point. I think many people would feel that Matthew Fox is weak on the practical, political side of things. That's one of Gregory Baum's critiques of the creation spirituality in general. But here he says, focus our work and energy. Get a project and try, instead of being diffused and I'm going to make the world better, let's make one little part of it better. Join up with others to work on it and try to be in touch with the pain of the oppressed. Yeah, Donnie? No, it isn't really. The Vatican's seldom upset on the justice question, because the Vatican's in tune with the justice question. It isn't what gets them. Generally, people don't get in trouble with that. Leonardo Boff in Latin America wrote all kinds of stuff about justice and no one cared. But when he turned the critique back on the church and said the church is unjust, that's when they got on him. And no, you see, the leaders, the Pope is big on justice. He's big on mutuality. He's ahead of most people. Pope's ahead of most people on the justice question. He sees the global situation. He sees one world. He wants to help the oppressed. And he wants rich nations to help poor nations. He critiques capitalism and he critiques socialism. No, I don't think that's the trouble. The spiritual revolution he's talking about, here has to do with creating justice. That isn't the problem. The Vatican doesn't like it when he attacks more intramural kind of things. When it seems to attack the church itself, or church doctrine, or when he goes outside by having Starhawk the witch on his faculty, or when he talks about God as a mother instead of a father, or both. That's what he thinks the charges against him are. That he's a more feminist and against patriarchy, that he talks about God as mother as well as father, that he is sort of in favor of homosexuals or gay rights, and that he has witches on his faculty in his institute out on the West Coast. I think those are the kind of charges that people level against him, and not the justice thing. Nor do I think that's really his strength. Fox's strength in this is, and far better than many of the spiritual writers today, he understands that you can't just have an interior spiritual life. We can't sit around and pat each other on the back and have prayer groups and say, aren't we wonderful? He understands that that kind of prayer goes with justice making. And I think that's to his credit. And so he sees both things, mysticism and prophetism, have to be part of the spiritual mix. But when it gets down to, the real nitty-gritty of how we're going to change this world, they're not going to read Matthew 5. I don't think he's the one that's going to guide us along this whole path all that well. He can give us the sort of a start and so on, but I think then beyond that, we're going to have to go to the political theologians, liberation theologians, who are much more in tune with how you change structures and get into politics and deal with economics and so on. I think our American bishops probably have more to say about that than Fox does at any sort of practical level. His thing is, as we see in number 3, is that we're supposed to learn, we're supposed to be open-minded with these groups that are put down. So he lists a whole bunch of people here who we ought to learn from instead of putting down. He calls it a panentheistic spirituality, to be close. So who we're going to learn from? From American Indians. He writes a lot about them, their spirituality. He says that's wonderful because they love the earth. Learn from the homosexuals, the handicapped, feminists. He says that over and again. The feminists are really the main cutting edge of how we're going to improve this world. From black people we're supposed to learn. Interesting, he likes the Celtic people, the Irish. But before the Jansenism got a hold of them. He thinks there's a marvelous Irish spirituality that just got covered over in the 17th century by Jansenism, but they could still recover this creation sense. And by ordinary people. Learn from ordinary people who find God in their work. Then the next one has to do with compassion, major theme. He thinks that that's Eckhart's major theme. Be compassionate like God is compassionate. We're supposed to do that for others. Why? Fundamental reason, because everyone's connected. Talks about erotic justice in number 5. Erotic justice. get passionate about straightening the world out, get into it, get involved, care about it. And then finally in number 6 we find a whole new list of sins. Interesting kind of list, coldness of heart. Let's have an examination of conscience on this. Have you sinned lately by coldness of heart? Or have you stifled your imagination? Have you repressed your erotic tendencies? You've fallen into dualism and the injustices which follow. Have you hurt the earth in some way? Well, if all of that is the case, then we have to look at Christ as the new creation. And he's the one then who will empower us to straighten out all of this. And then he will be Christ, to summarize then, who helps us to follow the fourfold path of befriending creation. We started out befriending the dark forces within, befriending our creativity, the artist in ourselves, and befriending the new creation of justice. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a summary of Matthew Fox's book, Original Justice. What was the title? Original Blessing. Very good. Original Blessing. And is there one burning question someone would like to ask before I close off this?
I've got a question, but the comment seems like it's a theologian of the heart more than of the hip, and I'm wondering if that's way
Very good point made. He's called Fox a theologian of the heart instead of the head. And I think that would be a good symbol for understanding him. And of course, that causes troubles for him in one way or another. We've done 3 parts here on creation spirituality. If somebody wants their chance to talk, can come Thursday night and for the reflections discussion, and you will have your chance to comment on all of this. Carry on the discussion. Also, the retreat that's coming up, the basic retreat on May 13th. You might want to be part of that and deal with the same thing. If I try to pull it together for myself, first thing is that I think Fox has got a crucial message that so many people have to hear today. Maybe people gathered here, but also many people we come in contact with. The next generation. It seems to me the next generation has to learn something about befriending themselves, befriending the world, befriending others, and befriending God. I think that when he calls for that integrated and holistic approach is really crucial. It really is an alternative to what many people have learned. I think we need to say it. And we start out by saying Matthew Fox is silent. And I think that isn't right. That isn't good. It doesn't work to anybody's benefit. And so part of my sense was, while Fox is silent, to speak for him, or at least to try to get his ideas out in one way or another. I'm just sort of hoping that the people who have already read the book could still find something in what I said tonight. That sort of took me aback, and I'm hoping that people will sort out and find something that's worse than that. And I want to thank everybody for being here, and you're welcome to come back again